Good evening all and welcome. Tonight we have a collection of stories about neighbours and why you should be wary with them. I also would like to introduce you to our collaborator tonight, Night Terrors. I've got a little bit of a fun fact to share with you about Night Terrors at the end of the video, so stick around. And of course, if you enjoy his content, link in the description and at the end. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. When I was really small, my parents would let me stay up late on the weekends to watch TV until I fell asleep. I really loved these times, and I would stay up later than anyone else, just because I could. One night I was almost asleep on the couch when I heard a noise on our front porch. It was the sound of our old-fashioned porch swing moving back and forth. I was a little scared, so I crept towards the bay windows of my living room and peeked out towards the porch. Sitting on my front porch swinging was an older woman, probably in her 50s, wearing nothing but a nightgown, covered in blood, and holding a huge kitchen knife. I flipped out and immediately ran screaming into my parents' room, but was too terrified from my words. My parents saw that I was upset, but when I was finally able to tell them what I saw, my dad got really angry at me and told me that it was just a dream and to go back to bed. I refused and kept crying and screaming until he'd had enough and snatched my arm and dragged me towards the front door to prove that nothing was there. I kicked and screamed all the way, trying to make him stop, but he kept on pulling. Finally, when we got to the door, he unlocked it, swung it open and said, "See, there's nothing." To this day, I have never seen the look of fear and shock that was on his face when that woman turned and stared at both of us and slowly stood up with the knife. My dad slammed the door shut, got my mum to call the police while he went and got his gun. He went back to the door with a 12 gauge and cracked the door enough to stick the barrel out. He asked her what she was doing, and she said, "Somebody killed my husband, but it wasn't me." My dad told her the police were coming and she freaked out, grabbed the knife and walked away. The police found her 15 minutes later, trying to break into one of our neighbors' houses. My dad warned my crazy uncle who lived next door what was happening. Apparently he was waiting on his front porch with his shotgun when she walked by. He pointed it at her and just said, "Keep on moving." I spoke to my mum, and she said they never really found out the whole story, but apparently she was crazy and off her medication. Her and her husband got into a fight, and she tried to attack him with the knife, but didn't seriously hurt him. When he got out of the house, she cut herself with the knife, either trying to end her own life or make it look like her husband did it. The police never spoke to us about it, and this is what we've pieced together from other neighbors.
My husband and I moved into this house 1.5 years ago, and it all started just after lockdown. The neighbors on one side have a couple in the bottom half and a single man on the top half. It's all one big house, but they're pretty separate in their living arrangements. We have had drinks with the downstairs neighbors a few times. The first time, they introduced us to the upstairs guy, Trev, and told us after he left that he had some brain damage from falling off scaffolding a few years ago. I'm pretty much the most paranoid person in the world, but every time I've thought there was danger, I've been proven right almost straight away. My husband doesn't bitch and takes things seriously. He even jokes that I've got a spidey sense for natural disasters. Because of this, I inquire a bit further. The lady of the house tells me very occasionally he will have a psychotic break and be violent, but that's very rare. Every once in a while, he shaves the cats. Cue my blank stare. She just laughed and said he's harmless, and she's got some knitted jumpers for the cats in case he does it again. I work in construction, and due to you-know-what, I've been on and off work like a yo-yo, but had a few solid weeks off while my husband went to work. Trev noticed this and came over one day to make sure I'm okay on my own. I said, yes, I'm fine, and my bloke will be home any minute. Thank you. A few days later, I open the door, which has a window so you can see out, and I throw the welcome mat out so I can beat it later. When I do this, however, he's standing there and halfway through saying something, like he was chatting away well before I opened my door. Then he says, "Well, are you?" And I obviously ask, "What?" To which he says, "Coming over for a smoke," and holds out a joint to me. I told him, "Sorry mate, no, I get drug tested for work," and I thought that would be the end of it. He just stared at me and said, "You're alone though, I know you are." I'd had enough. I told him to leave. I've got plenty of weapons, so I'm not worried. I turned around and went back inside. Maybe it was petty of me, but I went back out an hour or so later and sharpened all of my machetes and knives, which I collect. There's a few dozen so far, and I made sure to do it in the front step where I normally smoke, because I knew by then he'd be watching me. I often notice strange things, like my tampons being taken from the windowsill in the toilet, only when the window is open, and there's no chance they fall, because under that window is just flat concrete for ages. You'd see them. Also, my bins being sorted through, my mail being put on the step instead of left in the mailbox, and constantly seeing him hide and watching me while I'm cooking or doing the dishes, or even smoking outside. I spoke to the downstairs couple once, and the woman told me not to be so hard on him. He's got brain damage. I told her, speak to him. Tell him not to come over to our property line ever again, or I will deal with it. With the law, or a more permanent way. I will deal with it. So tell him. I haven't had him over since, but he still watches, and I still practice with my blades. I'm 5'3" to his 6'2". No, I don't care what's wrong with him. I'll protect me just fine. My husband knows better and is staying out of the way, while still keeping an eye on things. He's there if I need, but knows I'll sort out my own problems, just like last time. Let's never meet again, creepy dude next door.
I truly had some messed up neighbors growing up in Russia. My building still had a few alcoholics who would leave and break booze bottles everywhere and piss inside the building. But one man who lived on my floor was infamous in the neighborhood. This guy lived with his mother, who ironically was our building's janitor, although she was nearly fired several times for shirking her duties. This woman made moonshine in her bathtub, which often stank up her neighbors' flats. Her kid began sampling the moonshine early on and was a full-blown alcoholic and juvenile delinquent by the age of 16. He soon moved on to heroin and began beating his mother for her tiny janitor's salary for drug money. One time, he nearly put her in a coma, but she refused to press charges or kick him out. He broke into his neighbor's flat once for drug money and went to jail for that, about 2 weeks, I think. We decided to get an extra door for our side of the flat after that. The junkie was a metal grunge fan and wrote band names and Nirvana quotes all over the walls of our already dingy building. Like all the other alcoholics/addicts, this guy pissed absolutely everywhere in the building, even in his own flat. The downstairs neighbors actually had severe water damage because of his piss, and his flat was so foul that the next residents had to gut it completely. This junkie took it to the next level once, and shat all over our floor's hallway when his mother wouldn't let him inside one night. My grandma and the building's other residents demanded for years that this individual be removed from the building to no avail. His own mother, whom he physically abused, defended her precious son at every turn and refused to kick him out or even to send him to rehab. Eventually they fell behind on their utilities, and had to relocate to a smaller flat elsewhere in town. They lived there for maybe a year, until, rumor has it, the junkie killed his mother. No one knows what exactly happened, but the junkie was taken away by the cops when his mother died, and he was never seen or heard from again.
This happened a few years ago, but still freaks me out when I think about how differently it could have turned out. My husband, baby, and I used to live in not the greatest apartment complex. There were 3 sections of the complex, with a total of 6 apartments, 3 on top, 3 on the bottom, and 2 different buildings within each section. I lived in the upper middle apartment on the second building in the second section. I got along with my neighbors fine. We actually all moved into our apartments within a few weeks of each other. To my left is a woman we will call Barb, in her 50s and lives alone. Barb is a drinker and a big participant of any substances that make her feel good. She has a rotation of man friends that come and go. All fine by me. She gives me no issues, so I really don't give a damn about what she does. But it needs to be mentioned for the story's purposes. I already mentioned that these weren't the best apartments. They were income-based, old and cheap. I'm pretty sure the walls were insulated with newspaper, if they had any insulation at all. You could hear basically everything from both surrounding apartments, and a lot from the units below. The only time it really became an issue is during nap time and nighttime, when something would either prevent my 1-year-old from sleeping or waking him up. It didn't happen often, and when it did, I was always able to go knock on the noise culprit's door and handle it with no issues. Since my child was still a baby and I was constantly exhausted, 90% of his bedtime was my bedtime. Our bedrooms were on the opposite end of the apartment from the living room, kitchen, balcony, and Barb's apartment. We also slept with both a noise machine and a fan to drown out any noise disturbances during the night. This particular night, though, my husband was off work and we decided to watch a movie. There was a party going on in the first building of our section. Barb was, quote, friends with the party throwers, and we could hear her in and out of her apartment door several times, as well as all the party people who were outside smoking. At some point during the movie, I fell asleep using my husband's lap as a pillow. Around 2 a.m., loud laughing from Barb's apartment wakes me up. I get up to pee and brush my teeth. I do my business and make my way back up the hall to the living room from the bathroom to tell my husband goodnight. I hear knocking on Barb's door, followed with what sounds like her door exploding off its hinges and flying into the wall that separates her apartment and ours. My husband and I both say, "What the hell?" at the same time, and just kind of freeze. We hear Barb and a man talking, and it sounded like normal talking. They weren't yelling or anything. So we chalk it up to Barb and her guest having a little too much fun at the party and just shrug it off. I get into bed and quickly fall back asleep. No more than 10 minutes after getting into bed, I wake up to what sounds like heavy furniture being body slammed coming from Barb's apartment. Irked as hell from the second slumber disturbance and knowing that this was going to wake my kid up, I make my way back to the living room, planning to put on my slippers and to go knock on Barb's door and kindly ask her to be quiet. I first walk out onto my balcony to smoke a cigarette, while hoping she realizes how loud whatever she's got going on is, and to fix it without being asked. The body slamming furniture only gets even louder while on the balcony, so I assume they've worked their way through her apartment and are body slamming her bedroom furniture now. Even more irritated, I decide Barb's too blitzed to realize how loud she's being, and I'm going to have to remind her that none of us are deaf in my apartment. She was going to have to move her furniture fight somewhere else, or reschedule for normal furniture fighting hours, which are obviously during the day. I stand up and take a few steps towards Barb's bedroom window, where our small bucket for cigarette butts sits on the ledge of my balcony. Her bedroom window and the closest edge of my balcony to her window are only inches apart. She could easily crawl out of her window and onto my balcony, or vice versa. And that's when I hear it. Muffled screams, like someone is holding a hand over a mouth, and a man's voice say in a very low tone, "If you don't shut up, I'm going to kill you." Oh damn, is my first thought. I fly inside the sliding door from my balcony and grab my phone to call 911 while telling my husband Barb is in trouble. He goes out and bangs on her door. Nobody comes, and it's locked because he tried the door handle after not being answered. I'm standing between the living room and the kitchen on the phone with 911, and my husband walks outside and leans over to see if he can see anything through Barb's windows. The blinds are closed, but a couple of blind slats are broken, leaving a small crack big enough for my husband to see someone laying on the floor, halfway in her bedroom and halfway into the bathroom, and another person standing over them. He tells me, and I relay it to the 911 operator, while also adding if the police aren't here soon, we are going to bust the door down ourselves. She calmly asked me not to do anything like that, but to stay on the line, and that the police were en route and would arrive soon. About 2 minutes later, we hear several pairs of boots coming up the apartment stairs to get to the second level, and then loud pounding with, "Police, open up." I crack my front door to peek out and to tell them that we can still see 2 people in the back bedroom of Barb's apartment. There are 4 uniformed police officers with their guns drawn, and then one standing in front of the door tells me to get back inside and to lock the door. Yes, sir. I go back inside and stand right inside my balcony door to watch for anything, like Barb trying to escape the man, or the man trying to escape the cops. We hear another round of police pounding at Barb's door going unanswered, and then the sound of doors being kicked in. Fire and rescue have shown up at this point, and the whole complex is lit up with lights coming from emergency vehicles. We hear a small scuffle, and then the screen door of her apartment creak open. I look out of the peephole and see a man in handcuffs being led down the stairs, and then EMT coming up the stairs with a stretcher. A few minutes later, we hear her screen door creak open again, and I see EMT carrying a stretcher with someone in it. I open my door to get a closer look. Barb is unconscious and in bad shape. Her face and her head are bloody and swelling. The exposed skin of her arms are already bruising. As I'm staring at her in the stretcher going down the stairs in disbelief, the same police officer that told me to get back inside and lock my door walks out of Barb's apartment and asks if he can speak to my husband and I. I say yes and invite him inside, where he thanks us for calling 911 and tells us that he has little doubt that we saved Barb's life. He asks us what we heard, and I reiterate the entire story from beginning to end as he takes notes. He thanks us again and leaves. Barb calls me about a week later from the hospital to thank us. I ask her how she's doing, and she tells me that she has a fractured skull and bleeding on her brain, a broken cheekbone and jaw, broken ribs, and lots of bruising all over her body, but feels lucky to be alive and thanks me again. She also tells me the man is someone that she's known for several years, that he had showed up to the party right before she went home to her own apartment and was mad that she didn't want to sleep with him, and even madder that she had been super flirty with a person of color at the party. Several months later, the ADA prosecuting the man calls me and asks me to tell her everything from that night. So I tell her from start to finish too. She then asks if I'd be willing to testify in court, and I tell her whatever she needs to lock that animal up. A couple of weeks after that, I come home and have a summons on my door to be a witness in the case, but the court date listed has already passed. I call the ADA back and explain, both worried about how me not testifying would hurt the case in putting him away, and also if I had a warrant out for my arrest for no showing. She tells me that the date was wrong, but that I'm also not needed. I catch up with Barb a few weeks after that, and she tells me that my recorded call to 911 was used during court, and that the guy got 15 years in prison.
It was around 1 a.m., and my friend heard a noise outside of his front door. His front yard is really dark, so he looked through the peephole rather than opening the door. He couldn't see anything, but could tell something was below the peephole. He decided to open the door slowly, and as soon as he did, an older lady whose face was covered in blood and only wearing a t-shirt, no underwear or pants, tried to run into his house. He slammed the door on her and called the cops. While waiting for the cops, he kept looking out the little hole on the door, and every so often she would scurry back and forth on his lawn. I wasn't there, but I picture it like the alien at the birthday party in Signs. So the cops finally show up and detain the woman, and they get to the bottom of the story. Turns out the woman was his neighbor, and she was extremely drunk. She'd been drinking and locked herself out of her house and tried to get back in by breaking the windows with her face/hands. Side note, the neighbor no longer calls the cops when my friend has parties.
When I was 25, there was a short time I was staying at my aunt's. It was her, my 2 cousins, and I. She lives in a nice apartment complex, and her unit is on the lower level. Her living room has a lot of windows that she keeps open for fresh air and for her cats to people watch. Her unit happens to be on the corner, near a grassy courtyard path. When I had first moved in, I noticed a man who gave me an off vibe. My cousins and aunt said he lived upstairs and 2 units over. He was recovering from hard drugs that permanently messed him up. His parents paid for him to stay there as they didn't want him with them. They also said, other than hearing him mumble and say weird things, no one ever had an issue. My aunt works nights and leaves at 3 a.m. My younger cousin works nights and leaves at 2. That usually left my same-aged cousin and I, the only 2 there until we left for work around 8. Just for context, it is a very open living room to dining room plan. My aunt always has people staying over, so she has a second couch in the dining room in place of a table. This is where I slept. She stayed on the one in the living room. My aunt has also never been one to lock her doors. Until this incident. One night, I'm on my phone trying to sleep at about 1 a.m. and hear a man yelling. He's yelling, "Don't shoot," and banging on the door to the right of ours. 2 male college students live there and just told him that he had the wrong apartment and had to leave. He says sorry and walks off. I am looking through the kitchen window, which is in direct line of sight from my couch bed, and notice it's the weird neighbor who sees me and grins. He then walks back to his home. I was unsettled, but not enough to wake anyone else up over it. I told my family nonchalantly the next day in a funny and entertaining way. The next day, my cousin and I watch a movie and head off to bed. I have a very hard time staying asleep, but I woke up this time to the feeling of someone watching me. I check my phone and it's around 3:30 a.m., so I know it's not my aunt or cousin. I sit up and figure I'll go watch TV on my aunt's couch since she has left already. The feeling gets stronger as I am in the living room. Then I see the shadow of a person standing still in the grass courtyard, looking in. I froze. I immediately go back to my couch to get my phone. As I do, the person is gone. I am now trying to calm myself down and think of waking my cousin up when I hear this creepy man's voice. He is now at the kitchen window, which looks out directly in front of the front door. I drop to the floor out of his line of sight and start frantically trying to call my cousin. The man is now saying things at the window and front door like, "I'm not going to hurt you," and "I'm unarmed," over and over again. His face is up against the window. Then he starts talking about wanting to pet the cats he saw through the window. I can't get a hold of my cousin. By now, it had been almost 20 minutes of this. In this completely messed up situation, I didn't have many options. I could jump up and run for a knife, but I'd need to go to the kitchen. I could try to respond and ask him to leave, but I've learned when you underestimate crazy, you lose every time. I now hear him knocking and knocking while repeating his nonsense. I'm doing that ridiculous-looking army crawl snake slither across the floor down the hall now. I see the door handle start to turn. I'm about to jump up when my cousin bursts out of his room directly across from the front door. Now he's not the biggest guy, but boy was he intimidatingly mad at the circus show taking place at his front door. He starts yelling at the guy that he needs to get off of his porch and that he's calling the cops. The man tries to say, "I'm unarmed. I'm not going to hurt you. Don't be afraid." My cousin goes off and yells, "That's dandy. It's also 4 a.m. You need to leave or I'll call the cops. What the hell is wrong with you?" So the guy backs up with his hands in the air and leaves. Needless to say, we didn't go back to sleep. My aunt was called, who called the apartment manager. The next day when I came home from work, his parents were there, packing moving boxes in a truck from his place. Maybe he was trying to get me to open the door by seeming friendly. Maybe he had a bad trip and really wanted to pet a cat to feel better. We will never know.
My mum had this neighbour who pretended to be weak from cancer/chemo, so her landlords couldn't get mad at her when trash bins were full and the lawn was filthy. She even went as far as shaving her head and fake a limp, got a cane and everything. Mum baked some cookies and offered to take care of her bins and lawn. The neighbour then spills about her scam. My mum, now enlightened about my neighbour, the fault in our stars, bullcrap, and tired of the trash blowing into our yard, called the landlord. The neighbour wasn't happy and would blast music at ungodly hours of the night to get back at my mum. Mum would get frustrated because she worked late and left early, filed a noise complaint to the police arrive, and neighbour claims my mum, an old Asian lady, punched her in the chest. Neighbour wants her arrested. Mum shows cops our security cam footage, no mum punching, but instead finds the crazy neighbour kicking her 9-year-old daughter out in the middle of the night. The 9-year-old is banging on her door, and my mum comes out to check on the noise and tries to bring the hysterical girl inside at 2 a.m. The neighbour comes out and sprays her with the hose. The neighbour was taken away, and the daughter was sent to live with her father. Some neighbours are the worst.
I'm a female in my early 20s. I moved out on my own for the first time about 2 years ago. I haven't had much to do with any of my neighbors, and I've always been slightly uneasy due to the fact that no one around here is looking out for me. If anything seems off, no one would notice or do any investigating to make sure I'm all right. Last year, I noticed a man constantly walking his dog in the grass area behind my home. This isn't unusual to see. It's a common area for residences here. His dog is super cute, and my cat liked to play with him through the glass door out back. They would just chase each other back and forth and put their paws up on the glass and such. Real cute stuff. Well, one day, I was outside and his dog came running up to my porch with glee to get pets and to say hi to his kitty friend. This was the first time I actually spoke to this neighbor. We'll call him Mark. So Mark seemed decent enough, and we got along just fine. We started hanging out pretty often in a short time period, because I'm a smoker and he was letting his dog out all the time. It was summer, so we ran into each other quite often, and would spend an hour or more after work most days just talking. This lasted for a couple of weeks, I gave him my cell phone number and was happy to have a friend in my complex. I will say, he was very clearly interested in either having a romantic relationship with me or at least being friends with benefits. He said this quite a lot. I was very honest with him that I wasn't interested in either at all, and had to tell him this quite often. Frankly, I was getting rather irritated that this came up several times, every time we spoke. He rather quickly was trying to get me in his house, from the first time we talked until the last. He offered multiple times every time I saw him. I always said no, and blamed it on me being COVID cautious. He quickly got tired of that excuse and invited himself into my home. I always said no. One day, he came out while I was smoking with a bottle of wine and a couple of glasses, saying I had to try this stuff because it was delicious. I instantly noticed that the seal was broken. It was a screw cap bottle, but didn't seem like anything was drank. The bottle was filled to the brim, which I also thought was a little odd because usually wine isn't filled to the tippy top like that. So he pours a couple of glasses and doesn't drop a beat in telling me to take a drink. I felt very uncomfortable, but didn't want him to feel like he was being accused of anything when he was just trying to be a nice, friendly neighbor. After all, he poured himself a glass of the very same stuff, right? Well, my mom still raised me better than that, so I totally faked a sip and said it was good. After any sentence either of us said, he would again tell me to take a drink. I told him I don't really drink, so I'm pacing myself, but did say that I noticed he hadn't drank any, and to please go ahead. He didn't reach for his glass right away, but in the middle of speaking, he reached for his cup and knocked it over, spilling the wine into the grass. He brushed it off rather quickly and told me it was my turn to drink now. I said, "But you still haven't drank anything. You spilled your drink. Pour yourself another glass. I don't want to drink alone." So he did, but he still didn't drink anything. He did tell me a few moments later to drink mine. I told him that he needs to catch up, and we basically just kept doing that in circles. He reached for his glass again, and guess what? He spilled it. Wine is all in the grass now. Then he told me to drink. At this point, I'm done. There's too many red flags screaming at me to get the hell out. I'm honest with him that this seemed really sketchy, and I didn't trust the drink because he's refusing to drink himself, but is way too eager for me to drink mine. He told me he was just clumsy and taking it slow because he doesn't drink a lot, but he has seen me have friends over, taking shots and drinking beers and wine, so he knows I'll handle it better than him. Yet another red flag is raised. So he's been watching me. Huh. I think it's important to mention that our apartment complex is huge. He used to work here and knows the maintenance crew, and he doesn't live particularly near me. He is about half a block away from me and cannot see my windows or yard from where he lives, and has a few different common area yards closer to him that he could use for his dog. So I told him I'm flat out not drinking anything because of how this all seemed. He once again pours himself a glass, and once again spills it. There isn't much left in the bottle at this point. I pour the remaining wine in his glass and tell him to drink with me on 3. We raise our glasses. To my amazement, he actually takes a drink, and I spilled mine into the grass. Oops. He comes out about 2 nights later while I was out smoking, and instantly starts complaining to me that I wouldn't date him or have sex with him, and he doesn't know why all girls are like this. He starts getting really loud, shouting at me, asking me what the problem with him is, that I won't do these things. I told him that I had been honest with him since the beginning, that I'm not interested in that, and that it isn't him specifically. I'm just not interested in that from anyone right now. He still shouted at me and started complaining about his ex and her dog. Yes, her dog. Then proceeded to tell me that he used to abuse the shit out of that dog, and went into detail about how he wouldn't feed or give him water because it used to urinate in the house. and how he would kick it really hard. I'm horrified at this point, especially considering this entire time he's telling me this, he's playing fetch with this little dog. His dog always seemed scared of him, and I had even pointed that out in the past. He said that his dog's previous owners were abusive, so he was just very scared and distrusting. The dog was always very excited to see me though, and would cuddle up with me and stay by me, so I always thought it was extra special. But with that knowledge, I just think the poor guy is currently in an abusive household. I was so done with this guy that I just had to cut him off and said I needed to go because my friends were waiting on me. He has sent me several messages of gibberish when he is outside. He will just blow my phone up with random messages that I could never decipher. It will just keep going. He has also texted me telling me that he knows I'm home because he has seen me walking around, or that he sees my car in the lot. He will throw his dog's toys on my porch, I think trying to get my attention to come out because of the cute dog. He will just stand outside of my porch for hours. It's all cold and rainy and snowy these days, so it's even creepier. I think in his mind, because I'm a smoker, I'll come out eventually. Silly him though, because I just go out front when I see him outside. He said several things to me before the whole wine fiasco went down that were also red flags. I figured it might be a language or cultural difference though, because English is the third language he has learned, and America is the third country he has lived in. I guess the moral of this story is to just trust your gut. He still is bothering me, and like I had said, we only spoke and hung out for a few weeks in the summer of 2020. My last message from him was last night. He asked me what he had done wrong, and if I felt disrespected in any way. I have not spoken to him since he screamed at me for not sleeping with him, coupled with admitting horrible animal abuse. I thought about answering his text with the brutal truth about how twisted and creepy he presented himself as, and how uncomfortable he made me feel. But I don't want to give him any ideas on how he should improve. Stay smart, folks. Don't drink things people try to give you if the seal is broken. He was definitely trying to drug me.
I have an apartment. This lady lived on the 3rd floor. She must have let her cats piss everywhere, because the entire building reeked like cat piss. The smell entered my apartment frequently. When I passed her in the hallway, I would have to hold my breath because she reeked. I dealt with this for 2 years with multiple complaints to the office, until I eventually called animal control. Turned out, she had 30 cats in her apartment. Animal control took all of her cats away. She was evicted shortly after that. I know from talking to other neighbors that this had been going on for at least 5 years before I even moved in, but they had a hard time evicting her because she was Section 8, although I'm sure the apartment manager was very incompetent as well. She even told us that she had been working there for 6 years, and my neighbors were wrong that it had been going on that long. The maintenance guys had to put on masks and rip the carpet up and seal the wood under it, amongst many other things, to make that apartment habitable for future renters.
I am a female in my early 20s. I have filed a police report and have already told the story to those close to me, but I feel like venting about my piece of shit ex-housemate to make me feel a little better. Kareem is somewhat close to his name, so I'll use that. Now, I'm not very good at reading people, unlike my landlord. When I first met Kareem, he seemed polite enough. He was super tidy, filled the house with amazing smelling cooking, and best of all, he stayed out of my way. I'm kind of a loner, and stay holed up in my room with the company of my gerbils to quietly study and play Minecraft. We didn't cross paths often when the school year started in September. He was the replacement for my housemate. It's a 3-bedroom apartment, and I'd been living with another girl, Nellie, for a year already. She was pretty absent from the house, as she was almost always at her boyfriend's place. The third housemate had already moved out. Early on, he was honest about some elements of his past that I should have taken as a warning, but took them as him being honest. I had asked him, during the mini interviewing process that Nellie and I were holding for potential tenants, if he was 420 friendly. He was, but as it turned out, he was a little too friendly. A couple years ago, he'd been arrested for illegal possession of marijuana and sent back to his home country of Turkey for a year before being allowed to come back into Canada to continue his studies. I don't know how this kind of stuff works, to be honest, but that's what he told us. I try not to be a judgmental person, since he made it seem like it was a thing of the past. This was not the case. One of the first things I had noticed in September was that he smoked almost constantly. Not to the point of missing classes, but the whole house would stink up multiple times a week in the evening. Normally, I wouldn't mind a little smoke, but any stoner will tell you that each strain is different, and for whatever reason, his weed caused me to have very severe panic attacks. Around late October, I got sick of his shit and told him how to figure out how to contain it to his room. He said that joints are hard to contain and that he needed a bong. I ended up letting him borrow mine. About 2 weeks later, in November, Kareem said that he had broken the down stem, but that he'd replace it. Within a few days, he did replace it, but it was the wrong size. Maybe it was a bit bitchy of me, but I told him to buy me the right size. He refused. He said it was too expensive. I don't know. It's my property. He broke it. He should fix it appropriately, right? What I know was not out of line, however, was what I did after what happened in mid-February. Around January, my landlord said we should start looking for new housemates, which was reasonable enough. Not to Kareem, though. My landlord has always been slow at responding to messages due to the nature of her job, but he absolutely hated her guts for it. He called her awful things and every name under the sun behind her back, which made me feel weird considering I'd been her tenant for almost 3 years now, and we were on great terms. Before I move on to the next part, I'd like to quickly add that at one point during the housemate hunting process, he asked me if I'd be willing to move out so that his friends could move in, and that it would be super amazing if I did. Obviously, I said no. My landlord later confirmed that he had asked her if he could sign the lease behind my back. As I had mentioned earlier, we forged a good rapport over the last few years, so it was a firm no. Kareem got excessively antagonistic about my landlord's deadline when she wanted us to sign the lease. He started looking up the law, saying he legally didn't have to give her notice until X date, which was not true. He told me to quietly look for housemates and tell the landlord at the last possible date, which made me super uncomfortable since it was around midterms, and was secretly grateful she was pushing for the deadline so strongly. I just wanted it over with. It was shortly before I signed the lease with my new housemates that he showed how truly two-faced he was. I dug through our Facebook messages. The gist of the conversation was him asking to use my laundry after he moves out since he doesn't have any on site. I of course declined, to which he responded that he and his new housemates would pay me. Note that I have never met these housemates before and still have no idea who they are. At this point, I started getting extremely weirded out. I said no a few times, but caved and started saying stuff like, "I'll think about it," just to appease him, though I had zero intent on letting him use my stuff. It seemed like the best way to get him off my back, since for almost a week, he'd continuously pressured me and tried to get me to say yes. Things hit the first of two crescendos the day before the two new tenants and I were supposed to sign the new lease. Back to Facebook, and again, an approximation of our conversation.
If you don't promise to let me use your laundry next year, I'm going to make a scene in front of your housemates.
A scene?
When they come sign the lease with her, I'm going to tell them how awful our landlord is, that she doesn't care about us, and is terrible at replying to our messages. If you let me use your laundry, I'll wait until they leave to tell her face to face.
In other words, he was going to make my new housemates question my judgment and make them think I was a bad person. Why else would he go off in front of them and my landlord and tell them that she was a horrible and nasty person? He later claimed these messages were, in quotes, a joke, to which I messaged back asking where the punchline was, because I didn't see it. I felt like a badass saying that, I'm not gonna lie, especially since he never got around to explaining this supposed joke. At this point, I had a bit of a breakdown. I called my landlord that night when Kareem had left the house for a few hours, just to let her know what had happened, what he planned on doing the next day, and even sending her the screenshots of our Facebook messages. I told her I couldn't let her and my new housemates come over in good conscience. Call me a snitch, I don't care. This guy does martial arts 3 times a week. Despite being shorter than me, he could definitely send me through drywall if he felt like it. I felt threatened, and I didn't know what to do if he found out that I told her and was the reason signing the lease was rescheduled to a different time and location. She believed me, especially when she read all the messages. Full context, nothing conveniently cropped. She even saw the parts where I was playing along and calling her a bitch too. That's when she told me that she had seen straight through his act while he was signing the lease. Apparently, he spent half an hour reading, then rereading our lease, which is abnormal, then asking weird questions and being rude to her. After years of being a landlord, she could clearly see that he's the type of macho guy that likes to control women, but gave me the benefit of the doubt. Not to get political, but even as an anti-feminist, I'm inclined to agree, especially looking in hindsight at how he's treated the women, me, my landlord, Nellie, versus the men, Nellie's boyfriend and my male friends. After losing all 4 years of my free time in high school to the feminist movement, you'd think I'd be able to spot someone as blatantly misogynistic as him, but apparently not. It turns out this special brand of guy isn't a boogeyman at all. At least now I know one when I see one. I signed the lease with my new housemates the next day at a coffee shop, telling Kareem that it was out of the blue that we were signing elsewhere, and I had no idea why we changed plans. I thought I had gotten away with telling on him, until my landlord sent him a letter from her lawyer that very clearly stated that he would not be allowed to demand the use of laundry again, and that if he came back to the house after moving out, it would be considered trespassing. At first, I thought it was an overreaction on her part, but looking back on those messages, I can see why she made that decision. He angrily knocked on my door and shoved the letter in my hands when he got it that day, aggressively, and quite frankly, melodramatically, saying, "You betrayed me." I kid you not, those were his exact words. I think he lost his grip on me since he could no longer pressure me now that the secret was out, which frustrated him. Anyone who's being treated poorly by a misogynist can probably relate to this particular type of control and how it feels to wiggle out of it. Things settled down, temporarily. He retaliated in small ways, going out of his way to not sort the recycling in proper bins, not cleaning out the shower drain, putting plastic and metal in the compost bin, and smoking weed excessively. They were small, but irritated me. It was the day after he moved out that we reached our second and final crescendo, which led to the police report. After months of stuffing a shirt under the crack of my door to keep the weed stink out, and generally being freaked out to the point of carrying a small kitchen knife in my pocket whenever I left my room, you bet your ass I was counting down those last days gleefully. He said he left a few things behind from the kitchen. He came along with a friend, and tensely but amicably, we sorted out whose Tupperware was whose. On his way out, he spotted my mop and bucket. He claimed it was his, and that he wanted it back. I had this mop and bucket for 2 years. Why the hell was he claiming it was his? I said no, and he started roaming around the house, saying that he wanted his mop and bucket, and that if this was mine, his must be elsewhere, which made me uncomfortable as hell. I diffused the situation by saying I wanted to use it and would give it back later. I was planning on keeping it. I am under zero obligation to let him back in. He instantly snapped out of it. Later that day, he even said I could keep it. Why he changed his mind is beyond me. The next day, Kareem said that he had left 2 more things behind. I was irritated at this point. I just wanted to be left alone. I'd said I'd leave it outside. I admit, I definitely shouldn't have done what I did next. I was annoying and I cringed when I read my own messages, but his reaction was completely out of proportion.
I'll stop by in a few hours. I just got out of the shower.
I'm busy. Can't you just come by now? Just throw in some shoes and shorts and a t-shirt. Nobody's outside.
Fine. Then give me my mop and bucket.
I put the 2 items, a tray and a mug, on the porch. A few minutes later, I heard a polite knock. I knew it was him and ignored it. A few seconds later, a ring on the doorbell. Another ring. A louder knock. He kept ringing the doorbell over and over. Exasperated, I opened it, and there he stood, smiling.
Give me my mop and bucket.
I quickly shut the door. Truth be told, I was worried he'd try to stick his foot in the door and try to stop me from closing it, but he didn't move. He started knocking again and ringing the doorbell repeatedly. At first, it was with some time in between, a few seconds, but it grew in frequency and volume. It went from firm knocking to louder, angry pounding. My heart was beating so fast, I felt like I was running a marathon. Since he started straight up pounding on the door so hard, I could see it move, literally screaming, "Give me my stuff," over and over at the top of his lungs. After about 2 or 3 minutes of him being aggressive and doing this, I can assure you it felt like hours. He stopped, and I heard this weird metallic scraping sound, like metal on concrete, accompanied by a grunt, followed by loud metallic clangs. Silence. I waited for a while. I stealthily looked through my windows and didn't see him. I opened the door and, to my surprise, saw that he had pulled my mailbox off the wall and thrown it onto the path leading to the sidewalk. I kicked myself for not filming the incident, but took my sweet time taking the picture-perfect shot to show that he had made some kind of attempt to destroy the property. I mean, not that that can do much. It felt like the right thing to do nonetheless, and I still have it. I ended up putting the mop and bucket outside and telling Kareem to come get it, and that I just wanted to be left alone. I even took the battery out of our door code, since a part of me is paranoid he'll try to guess it and break in. He came by and took it, and I watched him leave from the window. He hasn't contacted me since. I saw him on the street the other day, and he gave me a warm smile as if we were friends, but I looked away and crossed to the other side just to avoid him. I filed a police report of the incident the same day, as advised by my landlord. She told me during our phone call that he has a documented history of aggression. I'm not surprised. I'm surprised she gave me the benefit of the doubt, though, and let him sign the lease in the first place. I guess this was a learning experience for all of us. When I asked her of her honest opinion of my new housemates, she said they were trustworthy. Plus, it turns out that the guys and I have a mutual buddy, so I'm not scared of them. I told them about the whole incident, and they blocked him on Facebook. They were super supportive and glad I filed the report. They know who he is and won't let him inside. The thing that freaks me out a little is that he moved just down the street. I can see his new unit from my window. I can't really say, let's not meet again, since we live so close and will inevitably cross paths on the street in the future. But I can confidently, and without any hesitation, say, the next time I see Kareem will be too soon.
Hey guys, it's Mort here. Thank you so much for listening. Happy Monday, everybody. It's Monday, which means tomorrow's Tuesday. This is all arbitrary information. If you enjoyed Night Terror's narration, please go ahead and show him some love, as I'm sure some of you will. He's a really good narrator. I really enjoyed his vocal work. Fun fact, fun story, in fact, mini bonus. So one thing that some of you may know is that when this channel was made, the channel name was being debated upon. And my original suggestion for this channel's name was in fact Night Terrors. So in a way, I'm low-key jealous that Night Terrors got the name I never had. Although of course, I am happy with the name I've got now. Mortis Media is a cool name. So there you have it. I could have been Night Terrors myself. Who knows what this Night Terrors would have been called instead? Night Terrors 2? Or something completely different. If things had gone differently that day. In any case, like I said, thank you, Night Terrors, for joining in tonight. If you enjoyed tonight's video, please be sure to leave a like. New videos 4 times a week, so just, press the bell for good measure, and don't swipe away when I post, and, all the important stuff that I'm sure you won't do. Alright then, the link to his channel is on screen. Final thanks to my members and patrons, and if you want to help support the channel, there are new links in the description. Also to my Ko-fi to, buy me, help me get channel things and donuts and stuff. Alright guys, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one on Wednesday.